Only 48 hours or so ago, the mood in neocon circles in Washington was so triumphant we could feel it across the Atlantic. In an astonishing display of American and Israeli military might, the Iranian regime had been almost entirely decapitated in their opening salvo on Saturday morning, and barely 24 hours later, it looked like Iran might capitulate to Trump's various demands, with Axios reporting that the Iranians were asking to resume negotiations and Trump telling The Atlantic, quote, "They want to talk." By Monday, however, the vibes had started to feel quite different. Iran's new interim council signalled that they weren't interested in negotiations, with Iran's foreign minister telling ABC why Iran is apprehensive to open negotiations.
Is a negotiated settlement with the United States still possible?
Well, you answered this question. We negotiated with the United States twice in the past 12 months, and in both cases, they attacked us in the middle of negotiation. And that has become a very bitter experience for us.
At the same time, the war itself showed no signs of slowing down. Iran launched attacks on targets in at least 7 other Arab countries. Fresh fighting broke out between Hezbollah and Israel. At least 3 American troops were killed in Kuwait. At least 3 F-15s were downed. Oil prices spiked and stock markets crashed. So, in this video, we're going to explain why the situation in the Middle East suddenly looks a lot messier than it did even 48 hours ago, and how the war could quickly spiral out of control. On the night of the 2024 US election, Donald Trump told his supporters that God had saved his life for a reason, alluding to the assassination attempt on his life a few months earlier. In the latest edition of Too Long, we explore how faith-fueled populism, from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin, has slowly been reshaping modern democracy. That's just one of 72 pages in the magazine, because, as always, there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, without further ado, we see basically 2 big reasons this war looks messier than it did 48 hours ago. The first and most obvious is that Iran's response to Saturday's strike has mostly involved striking targets in nearby Arab countries. For context, before the war actually kicked off, there was a pretty widespread assumption in foreign policy circles that Iran's response would be mostly focused on Israel, as it was during the so-called 12-day war last June. Back then, Iran did fire a handful of ballistic missiles at America's Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, but this was essentially performative, and it quickly became clear that Iran had given not only Qatar but also the US advanced warning. Iran's reluctance to attack nearby Arab countries last year reflected the fact that, in the past couple of years, Iran's relations with many of its Arab neighbours have warmed remarkably, in large part because at least some Arab countries now see Israel as the main threat to regional security, given its bellico-security posture and the fact that Iran's proxy network had been badly degraded in recent years. There was thus a widespread assumption that Iran would, once again, refrain from striking its Arab neighbours, not least because countries like Saudi Arabia have apparently been privately counselling Trump against a war. But, well, this isn't how things have panned out at all, and it actually looks like the bulk of Iran's missiles and drones have gone to targets in nearby Arab countries. This in part reflects Iran's military weakness. As the 12-day war demonstrated, Iran loses in a straight-up shooting match against Israel and the US. But it also reflects a wider change in strategy. This time, the Iranians are clearly just trying to cause as much chaos as possible, in the hopes of imposing a myriad of indirect costs on the US. This is a risky strategy. It could provoke Iran's Arab neighbours into joining the war against it, but it could also strain their relations with the US, given this is exactly why they were pleading with Trump not to go into the war in the first place, and because, by attacking a whole load of countries when America's military arsenal and missile defence reserves are already stretched thin, the US will be forced to essentially prioritise certain Middle Eastern allies over others. So, that's the first reason that the war doesn't seem likely to end anytime soon. Instead of imposing direct military costs on Israel or the US, Iran's strategy seems to mainly involve regionalising the war to impose a myriad of indirect costs. The second reason to be pessimistic, however, is that a deal already looks less likely than it did a couple of days ago. Trump seems to have been hoping for one of 2 things to happen. Either a full-fledged popular uprising and regime change, which is what he called for in his pre-recorded speech released after the first wave of strikes on Saturday morning, or what we might call a Venezuela-style outcome, where the Ayatollah was succeeded by someone more pliant or a response to US pressure, as happened in Venezuela, where Nicolas Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has proved more willing to cooperate with the US than her predecessor. This is what Trump has been signalling since, telling the New York Times on Sunday that he would be open to working with a more, quote, pragmatic government. He also reiterated his calls for the Iranian people, or specifically the Iranian security services, to take up arms against the regime in another recorded speech posted to the White House YouTube channel on Sunday evening.
I once again urge the Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian military, police, to lay down your arms and receive full immunity or face certain death. It will be certain death. Won't be pretty. I call upon all Iranian patriots who yearn for freedom to seize this moment, to be brave, be bold, be heroic, and take back your country. America is with you. I made a promise to you, and I fulfilled that promise. The rest will be up to you, but we'll be there to help. Thank you. God bless you to our incredible warriors, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Unfortunately for Trump, neither of these outcomes, popular regime change or a Venezuela-style outcome, looks likely in the near future. Perhaps it's too early to be pessimistic, but there are no signs of a popular uprising at the moment, and it's worth reminding viewers that last year's protests, which were a real threat to the regime, didn't actually happen during the 12-day war. Rather, they happened months later, and arose organically. The first protests were triggered by a depreciation in Iran's currency, and organised in bazaars, before spilling into wider anti-regime protests. The point we're trying to make here is that it's hard to manufacture protests to meet the moment, as Trump was apparently hoping to happen, especially when you're trying to survive a war. Similarly, the regime has been able to quickly reassemble itself, forming a new interim leadership council comprising President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Golem Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Ayatollah Ali Reza Aragchi, none of whom have signalled an interest in making concessions, a la Delcy Rodriguez. Rather, the regime has signalled it will not pursue any further negotiations with the US, presumably both because the US has attacked Iran during previous rounds of negotiations, and the regime knows that, given the iterative nature of this conflict, capitulating now would only invite further pressure down the line. This is perhaps the primary cause for pessimism. If a negotiated settlement is impossible, the war can only end when either the US decides to stop or Iran runs out of weapons. As we mentioned earlier, the latest edition of our magazine Too Long is out very soon. And if you subscribe using code SPRING26, then you'll get your first copy for as little as £4.99, as well as 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. The latest issue features our ranking of the world's 25 most influential people, using ratings from you, our audience, as well as from our journalists. Inside, we not only reveal the full ranking, but the stories of a number of people who made the list, from the return of Donald Trump and the calculated moves of Xi Jinping to the AI frontiers of Sam Altman. We look at the new entries, New York's first Muslim mayor Zohran Mamdani, the radical shift of Pope Leo XIV, and bastion of technocracy Mark Carney, as well as the shadows that still linger, like Jeffrey Epstein. Across 72 pages, this issue of Too Long features a whole lot more than just that. We also have a cover story on how the UK became more divided than ever, and how a broken country could rebuild, the fragmentation emerging within the EU, how religion is being hijacked by politicians, as well as much, much more. You can pre-order your copy at toolong.news, and remember to use code SPRING26 for the best ever price.